Retirement. Those golden years where you can sit back, enjoy leisure, spend time with family, and perhaps travel. But is this a realistic idea? Are you prepared to retire? State lawmakers see a state in crisis with many private sector workers at significant risk of not having enough retirement income to meet basic needs. They are considering a bill to address this problem. Is this a good move? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawai'i start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawai'i. I'm Yunji Denise. For some, retirement is not far away. For others, it may seem a long way off. Common advice is to plan ahead, start saving. But when and just how much? With Hawaii's high cost of living, many live paycheck to paycheck, making it difficult to save. Most state and county workers in Hawaii are automatically enrolled in a retirement plan. Some private sector employees have options, but many do not. State lawmakers are trying to change that. Our guest tonight include a representative of AARP, 2 business owners, and someone who represents life insurance companies. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawai'i Facebook page. Now to our guests. Sarah Gill is the Government Affairs Department of AARP. Among other things, she is an expert in public and private sector retirement security. John Iha is the owner and chef of Gochi Grill. His business does not offer a retirement plan to his employees. Stanley Lau is the founder and owner of Hawaii Tech Support. He has 14 employees and has made a retirement available to them. And John Mangan is the regional vice president of the State Relations of American Council of Life Insurers. His organization advocates for services and products that promote financial and retirement security. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here tonight. Sarah, I want to start with you. Let's talk about Hawaii specifically. What is the state for retirees here in our state, and what would this legislation change?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me tonight. It's really exciting to talk about retirement. It's something that people don't talk enough about, and I think the state of retirement here is a little scary, frankly. 1 out of every 2 households in Hawaii is at risk for a financially insecure retirement, and that doesn't mean you won't be able to go take a summer vacation. It really means you're not going to be able to keep the lights on and afford your medication. Part of the reason this is occurring is because 216,000 Hawaii residents don't have a way to save for retirement out of their regular paycheck. And people are 15 times more likely to save for retirement if they do have that access.
So what would the bills now being proposed in the House and in the Senate, what would that change?
It would change the number of Hawaii residents that can save out of their regular paycheck. So it would give workers an option to be able to save for retirement if they choose to use it. And it would also set up a turnkey program for small business owners to provide a retirement program that they don't have to pay for or run.
John, I know that this is something that your organization has some reservations about. What's the concern?
Well, I think we just want to point out some question marks or some cautions about the state entering into a business that, frankly, we're experts in. And what we do is we are committed to leading the industry and leading the country in providing a whole host of solutions that can help any individual in any type of work and any income level secure their retirement. And we do that through both retirement savings, but also beyond just savings. Once someone gets to retirement, we also can secure how they spend that money in retirement. To get to retirement and through retirement is a real challenge. And we do agree with the AARP and others that we have a crisis. We think the crisis is one of longevity. And what are we going to do, even as we get to retirement, to ensure that we have the assets, but also that we are able to make those assets last throughout our retirement. We have major challenges in long-term care, for instance. Our companies offer those products to try to ensure that as you get older, you're not exhausting your retirement plan. So we have solutions in every area. One thing we would say is that the private sector is working extremely hard and has options available to any small business or any individual.
A lot of folks, as Sarah pointed out, are not taking advantage of those programs. What's the problem with having the state just offer this as an alternative?
Well, I think there's a couple questions there. One is it's not just an alternative as it's set up. It would be a mandate on employers in Hawaii. One thing about our products is that they really are voluntary, so employers get to choose what type of plan they have, which means they can customize it. They can find something that works for their particular business. I know just from talking to these two gentlemen, they have different challenges. Their employees are different. They work different hours and they have different needs. And I think the key for us is to provide a plan that's tailored to the needs of a small business or a medium-sized business or a large business or to individuals. We also offer individual retirement plans. Some IRAs are available through us, but also through many other providers in Hawaii, readily available.
Stanley, I know that this is something that you've set up in your own business. It's not, you wouldn't necessarily participate in the state program if it does launch. Tell us about the plan that you've set up, why you set it up, and how many people are actually taking part.
Sure, we set up, it's called a simple IRA plan, and we set this plan up about 6 years ago through an independent advisor that helps us. And the great part about the plan is we do offer a match to our employees that choose to participate, so it's a great incentive. We don't administer the plan. There's a professional behind it that takes care of enrolling. We do some of the processing that's related to contributions, but I think the challenge that I see with a plan that's non-selective like this is if we look at all the small businesses that don't participate, I think a lot of them have the same concerns where there's challenges around the financial bookkeeping, whether it's a cost to maintain it or approve it. But the real challenge is if it's mandated, this is something that it's not like the employers are not going to have to put work into. There's bookkeeping, there's compliance, there's submitting paperwork and reports to the state. So I think it's actually going to be a burden for a lot of companies.
You have, though, set this up in your own company,
Right.
you know, without the state mandate. How many people in your company are taking advantage of this?
Right. So for us, we're a small company, but if you look at the number of participants, it's actually close to just about a third, even though we're offering a match.
So that's free money that they're leaving on the table.
It is, and we can't figure it out. We do our best to participate and have people participate by promoting it, but we just don't have what we would expect in terms of participation. I would hope that everyone would participate, but I think everyone's priorities are different.
Speaking of priorities, John, I know that you're a small business, and so you haven't been able to set up anything like this just yet. What would a state plan mean for your employees?
I have 3 employees, one of which who already works for a company that does offer a retirement plan. So she actually takes advantage of that. My other 2 employees, one would definitely jump into a state offered program. Definitely, I would also. And the reason for that for me is it's because I just started the business in June. I'm still dealing with just trying to figure out how to operate on a daily basis, how to get into a rhythm, let alone even thinking about retirement plan for myself or my employees. If it was provided by the state where I didn't have to really think about anything, or if the easier it would be for me, the more inclined I'd be to sign up for it.
Do you think that you'd face the same challenge, though, that Stanley has in terms of getting people to participate? I mean, the cost of living in Hawaii is so high, people might feel like they need every dollar right now.
Well, again, since I only have 3 employees, I definitely know my one of them would definitely take advantage of a program. The other one, maybe not. He works 3 jobs though, so I mean, there is all, especially in the food industry, there's so much. If you're a server, there's a lot of cash flowing around. It's just so it's hard to pinpoint in a restaurant who would take advantage of that program. I would say servers would less likely to be inclined because servers they're short term. A lot of them are students, working their way through school, versus cooks or chefs who are in it for the long haul. Those guys would be more prone to take advantage of that program, I would say. So.
Let's talk a little bit about the legislation, what it might cost the state, in other words, what it might cost the taxpayers, and if we don't do it, what that costs the taxpayers.
That's a great question. So the key issue in our minds is that if we do nothing, it will cost taxpayers. So a recent study that we commissioned found that the state of Hawaii would save roughly $32 million over the next 15 years if they help people save their own money for retirement. The way that most other states have worked, and there are 5 to 10 other states, depending on how you count the different models, that are already setting up these programs and up and running. For instance, Oregon, who has Oregon Saves, is very similar. They've got $14 million in assets under management thus far, and more than 60,000 people are using the program. The way they set that up in terms of funding was the state loaned money, roughly about $3 million in Oregon, but it would be less for subsequent states. And those monies are paid back over time, so it doesn't cost the taxpayers anything, really.
If we don't do this, what's the concern?
If we don't do this, we are going to have generation after generation continuing to retire into poverty. In fact, the number I mentioned earlier, 1 out of every 2 households has a financially insecure retirement potentially. It used to be 1 out of every 3 households in the 1980s. We see this getting worse and worse. And I think this program the state is talking about is really important because actually all it says is that employers need to offer their workers the option, the ability to save for retirement. It doesn't require them to use the state program. They're always open to go use any of John's products or any of the other products that are out on the market.
We have people calling in with their comments. I just turned 60, says this caller, and have been thinking about retirement in the next few years. I haven't bought long-term care insurance, mostly because I deem it unaffordable. Is it too late at my age? John, what would you say to this caller?
Oh, I don't think it's too late at all. And in fact, long-term care is a difficult product, but it's very important. And I've got some good news, actually, and that is that our industry is innovating in this area. And 2 of the new products that we're offering are actually hybrids. They're life insurance cash value products and what we call an annuity product, which is this kind of an individual savings product. And those are now available with a long-term care option. So that if you decide you want to use that product for your retirement, you can use it for retirement. But if you happen to need long-term care services in the next 20 or 30 years, you can also use the cash for long-term care. So it's a great way to kind of cover both bases. Those products should be available here in this state. So I think it's a great option to take a look at.
Ling, writing in through Facebook, says it's hard to retire if people like to stay in Hawaii. Everything is expensive, and it's not so many chances for elder people to find a job, even a part-time job. Are these conversations that you are having in your workplace in terms of retiring at all in Hawaii? I mean, Ling here writing in about how difficult that could be.
I mean, you know, with the talk of raising the minimum wage and everything, none of my employees that's the #1 concern too. It's just how we're gonna buy lunch every day, you know. Times are tough.
Yeah. Ivan in Hawaii Kai writing in, I've tracked the cost of living here in Hawaii from 1998 to 2016, and home and insurance, property taxes, car registration have gone up 7% each year. So if everything doubles every 14 years, people aren't going to be able to save. Do you think that that's why you have just 1/3 of your workers buying in?
Absolutely. I think we just talked about, 1 out of 2 not being able to retire or, to retire in any reasonable way. I think if you look even further, actually, behind that, it's the Alice report says that 1 out of 2 are pretty much living paycheck to paycheck or one catastrophe away from financial difficulties. And so, I think we're talking about retirement today, but we really need to start looking at the affordability and the cost of living issues, because we can't even talk about saving money for the future if we don't have enough for today. And I think that's where, as a state and government, we need to look at ways that we can, even as young people or younger people that aren't even considering retiring yet, how can we afford to stay here? And I think there's a big issue with people leaving the state because it's just unbearable.
I mean, it certainly is all intertwined, and when we look at just how expensive it is to stay here in Hawaii, some of the numbers I think that I got from AARP were saying that it was 17% of our seniors are living at the poverty level. That's a pretty tough situation. How much money do we need to retire in a state like ours?
That is a really great question, and I'm sure John will want to weigh in on that as well. I think, the average varies state to state, but Generally, you could need as much as 12 times your final salary or more in retirement. And that can be a really scary number for people. So I do like to talk about the fact that when you take Social Security is a vital decision that every household makes. So if you can wait to take Social Security until your full retirement age or beyond, you could make an additional 8% a year in your Social Security benefit by waiting. So sometimes you don't have to bite off the entire apple, you can just take a piece at a time.
Okay. What's your take on that? I mean, how much do we need to retire?
We need to start saving right now and double it up. We need to start young and we need to continue. We need to work as long as we can, and we need to find every opportunity not only to save, but also to protect ourselves from income loss. So for instance, another solution that we have is to protect you with disability insurance. If you become disabled in your working life, that really interferes with your ability to save for retirement. So protection is also important. Here's some good news again in Hawaii. Almost 600,000 life insurance policies are in effect in Hawaii. Now that's about $1.4 billion that will be paid to families, friends, beneficiaries, charities in some cases, and to small business. That money is potentially a great source of retirement for people who have planned ahead and paid their premiums and made that sacrifice over time. So I don't want people to get down. I think there's optimism about when you protect yourself during your working life and when you think ahead with products like life insurance and you're saving in a plan either at work or individually, you can begin to cover those bases.
You know, I think for a lot of people who are working, the idea of saving money in that way, like all of it just feels sort of like a foreign concept, and if it's not just integrated into your paycheck, they don't necessarily do it. What do you suggest for folks who might be watching and think like, oh, maybe I should start, I don't even know where to start?
Well, if you're lucky enough to have an employer who's set up an opportunity and who's giving you a match, then you better do that right away. You better at least do the 3%, because your employer is essentially giving you a bonus. It's like a holiday bonus, right? And that's a sacrifice for a small business to do. But it shows the care that that person has for their workers. And so I think first and foremost is get started. And if it's $5 or $10 or $20 a paycheck, when you start, you cannot believe the impact that has over time. When you're saving for 40 years, the accumulation tax-free in most of these products can make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see you nodding. I mean, to the 2/3 of your employees who aren't taking advantage, what do you tell them?
Well, we try to promote it as much as we can. We've looked at other options in terms of, we know that the cost of living in terms of housing in Hawaii is very expensive. We talked to some of the home ownership centers about what we can possibly do to partner with them, education, what it takes to get into a home, to figure out how much of a down payment is required. So I think you're right. A lot of it has to do with education, but I think there's a big portion that has to do with where they are in life. Are they able to save and contribute? What are their priorities? Maybe they can't wait till they turn 59 or 60 to use the money. And I think that's where, you know, we obviously can't force them, but we would love for them to participate, because I think this is something that we want for them for their future. But we understand, and you know, we by no means ask why they're not participating, but I think the numbers reflect a problem, right? There's some issue that's preventing people from participating, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is, you know, the ability to effectively save beyond their expenses.
Sarah,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a perfect point. I also would add there's a relatively new field called behavioral economics. The most recent Nobel Prize winner actually wrote a book called Nudge, and that's what Hawaii Saves is based off of. So what we know is that although incentives are great and it works for a lot of people, what really works is automatic enrollment. So if you're in the program on day one as an employee and you have to choose to opt out, that makes people 20 times more likely to save for retirement. So there are a multitude of different ways to do this, but what we know looking at Oregon is that those 60,000 plus employees, most of them are middle and lower income. So the average saver that's using Oregon Saves makes $29,000 a year. So yes, obviously money is a big issue for these folks, but if you make the right way, the easy way, it's really a no-brainer, and that's what Hawaii Saves does.
How realistic do you think it is for a small business to implement something like this if it's not mandated by the state?
me personally, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I think, you know, as far as an elderly person trying to get into a program also, it's almost intimidating. You know, I wouldn't know where to begin. I don't know where, even, you know, all figures, everything. I'm just completely, I have no knowledge about any of this stuff. So it's a little intimidating. It's a little bit harder for me to get out of my comfort zone and actually start thinking about retirement. But if it was, you know, if it was just given to me, taken on my paycheck, everything, and I would, you know, it would be easier, and I would be a lot more prone to participate versus not, you know.
Right, and I mean, you were telling me your workday starts at 1 in the morning,
Right,
so
right.
it's not like you've got a lot of leisure time.
Right. I mean, I'm either at work or I'm sleeping, or, you know, it's I don't really have too much free time to think about other things other than my business right now. So it's a little challenging.
Right, and John's the business owner. He's not the employee. His employees are probably even less apt to participate in something like that. In the Oregon model, how much is, you said $3 million?
$14 million
I'm sorry,
saved, yep.
$14 million saved. How soon will they be able to pay the state back?
So they're looking at a projection of 5 to 10 years. It could be a little bit sooner, depending on the program. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about how Oregon's doing. In fact, it's working really well. Roughly 3/4 of the employees have chosen to remain in the program. And that's really what we expected when we set up Oregon Saves. And that's what we've been seeing across the country in the many states that are doing this.
John, do you think Oregon's a good model?
Well, I'm from Oregon, and so I'm proud of what they're doing, and I think they're doing the best job that they can. I do think they've borrowed actually a little bit more than $3 million. It's more like $5 million. The key to that is, for us, you know, we have some concern about whether that money can be repaid. Unless the projections of participation are met in the long run, the taxpayer will be on the hook for that startup cost. Now, it may be that Oregon has decided that it's worth it to spend that money and to subsidize a plan. I think we'd like to focus on what's readily available in the marketplace today that doesn't cost the state or put the state taxpayer at risk for that money. And I think we can do that. We've seen that small businesses do have access to programs. And one of the key words that I was looking for when you were talking, John, is the magic word is advisor. We have great financial advisors and professionals that work in your community, and they're licensed, they're regulated, they're extremely bright, they have a lot of amazing information, and they can come and meet with any small business and say, you know, it looks tough, but we can make this happen. It's not as hard as you think, and it is available to you.
To the business owner or the employee who would want to participate
Yes.
but thinks that they're going to spend a bunch of money, what would you tell them? That, you know, fees and things like that.
Well, I think I'd ask Stan to address that, but I think you can get a simple IRA program up and running for very little money. It's really a matter of just setting up your payroll, and then the advisor comes and meets with your employees and deals with them directly. One of the things that we worry about in a state-run plan is that if an employee has questions about investment accounts or is worried about where their money's being placed because they've not opted in, they've just decided to let their money be defaulted into an account, and they have questions or concerns, who are they going to go to? We think they're going to go to the employer. And if they have a concern, the employer is going to be, in a sense, on the hook for dealing with that. If you have your own advisor, someone who deals with you specifically, we think you can be in a stronger position with your workers and help protect their needs.
Well, let's talk about the nuts and bolts. I mean, how easy or difficult was it for you to set up the plan? I know you're doing the 3%, but it doesn't sound like it's costing you a lot of money, especially since you only have a third buying in right now.
Right, and so the startup it's relatively simple. We worked with an independent financial advisor. He came in, helped us set up the program, worked with all our employees to enroll those who wanted to enroll. We have, some administrative tasks. We have posting requirements, notification requirements, and other than that, it's payroll related. So we have deductions for those who want to contribute. And I think in this model, it works really well. We choose to do it We understand because we have professional advisors letting us know exactly what needs to be done. They send us notifications. And in thinking about it and hearing the comments that this will be mandated, that all businesses, whether you have one employee or you're a large business, is knowing that we've done it. It's although I think it's something that's very doable. The question is, can other people, like John was mentioning, if you're not aware, the employer in this, from what I understand with the way the proposal, the bill is written, is you're still responsible to administer, to keep records, to handle the HR and payroll deductions, to file reporting with the state. So it's not that this is just something set up that we can just participate with as an employer with no strings attached. There's still administrative burden that now will be mandated and forced on all employers. And I think that's my concern. Although we offer it, it's thinking about all the other businesses that already are burdened. Now this is an additional burden.
Sarah, what would you say to that?
I would say that actually this is targeting those exact issues and trying to move the ball, which hasn't moved in decades. So if you look at the experience since the 1970s, roughly 1 out of every 2 workers has had access to a retirement plan at work. So half the private sector has been left out in the cold for decades. Nothing has changed this. So we've gone through the technology revolution. We've got tons of new products, internet, social media, and yet access hasn't changed. And so one of the things we've talked to small business owners in Hawaii, what they tell us overwhelmingly, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 business owners tell us they want the state to take action because they find it too expensive, too time consuming, too confusing. They're just busy keeping their doors open, like John said. And so the intent of this program is to keep the operational burden and the monetary burden away from small business owners. The only thing small business owners are responsible for is payroll deduction and giving a packet of information to the employees.
So who actually invests the money, handles all of that? Would the state create a new Department of Savings? I mean, how would this actually work?
I like that title, Department of Savings. That's interesting. So the way this works is public-private partnership, very similar to a lot of the other programs states often run, such as ABLE accounts or 529 college savings accounts, deferred compensation. It's all done through the private sector, and that's the key. Again, misinformation out there. The state's not managing the money. In fact, the state is going into private account. Individual employee dollars are going to private accounts that the state can't touch. And big, well-known names are bidding for this work, so it's contracted out, and the state isn't managing it.
Okay. What's wrong with that model then?
I guess the difference is really we believe in automatic enrollment. In fact, the last major retirement legislation, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 12 years ago we had the Pension Protection Act, which really opened the door to automatic enrollment, which has been an amazing tool. And it's what's helped us move beyond a static approach, where employees they join a company and the employer feels more comfortable legally putting them in a default account. It's been extremely helpful. The difference in our arena is that we let employers make that choice voluntarily. They can use the auto enrollment. We encourage them to use it, but it's really going to be their choice, because in the end, it's a delicate balance, right? The employer is making a decision for their employees, and some employers are nervous about that because they're taking their money and they're making a decision and putting it in a certain account. So, in a voluntary free market approach that we embrace, the employer has that choice. At the state plan level, this program would basically mandate that choice for the employer.
Wouldn't your members be some of the folks who are bidding for this business and ultimately in the end?
I don't think so. I think it's one probably record keeper or provider. That's how it's been in Oregon and California, for instance. It's usually a large record keeper, they call it. Our companies are going to keep doing exactly what they're doing, which is selling individual and group insurance products, group retirement plans in the same way that we do, because we think we can tailor them to an employer's needs, and it's a voluntary choice of the employer, and they're going to be more comfortable with that. And also, another thing that we haven't talked about yet is the safety and sustainability of a retirement plan. It's extremely important to our providers. When we put a plan together, that we know it's completely legal, that it's completely safe for the employer. They don't have to worry that they're putting their employees in an awkward spot. And they need to know it's sustainable over 30 or 40 or 50 years, because the worker is going to have to rely on those funds later. So The issues with some of the issues with the state plan are, is the state going to have to keep sustaining it with a subsidy? Are there legal complications that could cause the employer liability that they didn't expect? And is the worker, in the end, going to have recourse if they're unhappy with what the state has decided to put their money into?
I mean, the employee does have the option to not participate.
Sure, you bet.
John, tell me, do you have any of the concerns that Stanley raised in terms of having to administer a plan to, this added layer that there would be some work for you if the state did pass this?
If it would allow me to provide, an option for my guys, then I would gladly take on the responsibility of added admin. I mean, I only have 3 people, so it's like a little family, and I'd be more than happy to go forward with that. Absolutely.
D. Chun writes, as a financial planner, I am sometimes dismayed to see the high administrative and investment fees my clients have paid to their company's 401k plans. How would Hawaii Saves ensure that fees paid by participants be reasonable?
That's a great question. Fees are really important. It may not sound like a lot to pay 1% more in fees, but it could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you're ready to retire. So these states have really contemplated that, and most states have included a fee cap in their bill to make sure that fees are reasonable. The other thing that Hawaii Saves would do is it would aggregate, it would bring together small businesses so they could negotiate, the state would negotiate on their behalf with providers a warehouse model deal. Rather than these individual business owners going out and getting a retail deal, they're going to come together and get a cheaper product.
These are two interesting comments. I'd like to read them both. Cost of living and housing stands in the way of savings. I knew that since becoming an adult, I'd work till my last breath. That's Wesley writing in, which is a pretty dismal outlook for retirement. And Cliff from Mililani wants to know, how much would a 27-year-old have to save per month in order to have $1 million at the age of 60? I like your thinking, Cliff. That's a nice outlook. Are those the choices? We work till we die, or we're lucky enough to save $1 million?
Well, I will say one advantage that we have as an industry is we actually have actuaries who can answer that question. Well, I can't answer that question, but the key is to start young and to make it consistent. It doesn't have to be a large amount to start. And as employers, we all want our younger workers to start early, because that's the only way we're going to get this done. And what I would say is it's going to take everybody working really hard, not just on the business level, not just at the state level, but also policy advocates like us. We're going to need to advocate for policies that make it easier for people to save over time. And one of the things we're excited about right now is that Congress, despite its dysfunction, is coming closer to some national reforms that could really help make it easier for small business. And as Sarah says, to try to get aggregated plans, multiple employer plans, they're called, so that small businesses could get together, maybe all restaurant businesses or all chambers of commerce, and provide one plan that's simple, and only one plan administrator that would take the burden off of the smaller companies and allow them to participate. That legislation is getting fairly close to being approved, and we're working with AARP to try to get it approved.
I mean, if it's not Hawaii Saves, Sarah did lay out a pretty bleak picture of what happens if we don't do this. What is the alternative?
Well, the alternative is we need to look at anything that's budget relieving to the state. So we're really proud, though, of what we do, because that's exactly what our products do. Every year, we're paying out right now more than $350 million in individual retirement plan benefits to Hawaiians. Now, that's almost $1 million a day, and that's from products that they've already purchased in the voluntary market. So it absolutely is true that that money is taking the pressure off of state government. So as policymakers, I think in any state you would want to encourage individuals to make that choice, to buy those protections, to invest in a retirement plan, to encourage business to set up a plan through whatever means you can. The mandate issue is one that I know employers push back on. That's one that I think could be a sticking point.
John, I mean, how many of your employees or the people, I'm sure you talk to other small business owners, people in the restaurant industry, how many do feel like they have to work, as this person wrote in, until their last breath?
Oh, in the restaurant industry, if in a small private restaurant, every single one of us, we're all going to work till we die, guaranteed. As far as retirement, in the restaurant industry, I would say few to none think about retirement until it's too late.
Do you think that that's unique to Hawaii, or do you think that that's overall?
I think overall, I think the restaurant industry is a little tougher, a little kind of intense with a lot of young people. So it's I think it's just the environment in a restaurant that dictates whether or not you're gonna just what you think.
Right, that you don't necessarily
Right.
think ahead. What about in your industry? Do you feel like that's a similar outlook? And you talked about the Alice report, just so many people just one crisis away from homelessness or, in that kind of dire circumstance.
Right. So we're actually in the technology industry, which, you could look at it as, maybe we have a little more leeway. There's a lot more demand. Pay is normally better, but we're still, and I think this is not new, Hawaii's worst in terms of rankings for cost of living, for the pay differentials. So we have a different challenge. Although our workers are, better, have a higher income, I think we still ultimately have the same problem where it's just so expensive to be here, to live in Hawaii, where we have an employee or had an employee that was here, moved here from the mainland and realized just how expensive it was and had to go back, or is going back. So I think we have a different challenge. It's great to think, I think everyone needs to think about saving for the future, but like the Alice report says, half of us need to think about the now, and I think that's the challenge.
Sarah, how do we balance that? How do we think about the future when we are so focused on the now?
Yeah, so that's the piece that Hawaii Saves, that excites me most about Hawaii Saves. You heard a little bit of talk about federal action, and there's been a lot of talk for many years. In fact, in 2008, both President Obama and McCain proposed something similar to Hawaii Saves, but on a federal level. And since then, nothing has happened. And I gotta tell you, I've been here for about a week. I've been all over the country. What I see is that we need a solution that works for Hawaii, because what works in Hawaii isn't going to work necessarily on the mainland and vice versa. And that's what this does. It allows us to engage in a conversation that works for the local businesses. That's really important.
How much money would we actually, an average paycheck, how much would actually go into this fund if it did get adopted?
Yeah, it's completely up to the employee. That's the important piece. You've heard a lot about things being voluntary, and that, I want to be clear, Hawaii Saves is completely voluntary. The employee decides if they want to save, how much they want to put away, and where that money would go. I can speak from experience in Oregon. The average amount that's put away about every month is $100. Accounts at the end of the year are roughly $1,100. But remember, these are people who've never saved for retirement before, mostly. So we are figuring a way to crack the retirement nut through these state-facilitated programs.
I think people who are watching right now might think, I'm too late.
Yeah.
When is it too late to start?
It is absolutely never too late, and I think that we share a lot of common ground, John and I, on this point, on most of these points. Starting today is the perfect time. And that's, again, the behavioral economics piece. People really have a palpable fear about retirement. It's something they're worried about, they don't know where to start, and they just keep putting it off, right? If you're worried about paying your bills today, if you're worried about getting your kids to school on time, figuring out how to open up an IRA on your own is probably not your priority. But again, yes, we should all plan to retire to and through retirement if they can, but if you can just save enough money to wait to take Social Security, that's an amazing goal that's worth reaching for.
And we're talking about 70 for that.
Well, I mean, so it depends on your age, but if you can wait beyond the age of 65 to take Social Security, you're going to be in much better shape.
When is it? I know she says it's never too late, and today is a great time to start. How much money, would you think, is that $100 a month that she's talking about? Is that enough? And is it ever too late?
It can be too late to accumulate a large nest egg when you're 55 years old. Now, the law does allow in qualified plans catch-up provisions, which gives people that are at that age a chance to put in more money, tax qualified, which is a good thing. But you do need to start young. And I do fear that sometimes also we're a culture of spending. And our industry as a whole is always thinking about the future. We're always thinking 40 years down the line. And in order to get there, you need to start now. And if you're spending $1,000 on a new cell phone every 6 months, well, you could rethink that. You could save some money by not doing that. You could wait a year and put $1,000 away into your retirement plan at work or into an individual IRA. It's interesting that there's now more money saved in individual IRAs than in defined contribution plans in the United States. It's almost $9 trillion. So the IRA is an important savings vehicle available to anybody, but it requires discipline and a choice and sometimes a sacrifice.
John, how do you think we get people to buy into that? You know, you're talking about people who are just living day to day and just trying to make it. How do we get them to think about the future?
I think, like Stanley was saying, it's all about education because, well, and it's almost to the point of force feeding people information because, you know, unless I was on this forum and I was invited to be here, I wouldn't even be thinking about this either. You know, and then it was, I'm not saying it was forced upon me, but I think people are, it is a topic that people kind of shun from. I do. Maybe it's because I don't want to think of myself being old enough to retire. Yeah, I think it's all about education and letting people know options and, you know, what's available out there.
Someone writing in, also named John, says, I'm a state employee. My employer doesn't contribute to Social Security, instead takes out the same amount as if they were contributing to Social Security, sets it aside in a kind of retirement savings account. How does the program being discussed tonight compare?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty comparable to deferred compensation, and I think that's a big difference, right? Private sector workers versus public sector workers have different experiences. So most public sector workers have access to a traditional pension. They additionally have access to sort of a 401k style deferred compensation. And so what we're trying to do is level the playing field between public and private. So this bill, Hawaii Saves, is about the have-nots. It's about the folks who haven't saved for retirement yet, who don't have access to something like deferred compensation, and we want to make sure that they can save out of their regular paycheck in an easy way, the same way as public employees can.
Mike from Kipapo Gulch writing in says, where do you put your 401k? I have one, but I lost $83,000. I'm going to send this one to you. No investment seems stable. I mean, that is a concern when you invest in the market. Obviously, you do risk losing it.
That's true. And there's different kinds of risks. So if you're a young worker and you're put into a low interest account and you don't pay any attention to it, that's a huge risk as well. You should be in a growth account. If you're older, you want to have less risk because you're closer to retirement and you can't afford to have a market fluctuation and have what we had in December where a lot of retirement accounts went down 15%. You can't afford that when you're 62 years old. So a lot of it is on the employer as well to make sure that the plan that they have is safe, stable, and sustainable. Those are sort of our watchwords. You know, the voluntary choice and the working with an advisor helps ensure that you're getting the kind of plan that has the options that fit workers that are young and workers that are in the middle of their career and at the end of their career, because those choices could end up making or breaking your retirement.
Right. I mean, the market obviously changes every day. How were you able to do that for your employees, guarantee them a little bit of stability, if you will?
So we as an employer do not guarantee any kind of stability when it comes to the retirement plans. But like John was saying, it's really having the professional consult. I know someone asked about how much do you need to save between 27 and 60. I just did some rough numbers. I think it's about $1,000+ a month. Right, if you factor it out, it's to get to $1 million. But I mean, there's calculators for that. There's financial advisors. My point is, there are professionals that do this, that they can help. I think to say that employees in the private sector have no options, I think that's, there are a lot of options, right? All it takes is finding a right fit advisor, and some of them don't charge you any fees up front. You can consult. They can tell you what you need to do to start, retiring at a certain age, how much you need to save. We went through that process ourselves, and I think, yes, part of it is the education, but part of it is actually kind of going out there and making that a priority. And I understand that part of the plan is try to lower the barrier of entry to make it easier for people. And I think the resources are out there for people. It's just they need to kind of make that a priority and go out and do that.
You know, you set this up for your workers. Did you, or for your employees, did you do this to make yourself more competitive? Did you do it just because it's the right thing to do? Why did you take the step to begin with? Because it does cost you some money and some administrative work as well.
It does. Yeah, it costs us money, but I think for us as an employer, we felt it was the right thing to do. It was something that we could offer in terms of perks. We in no way look at this as a hiring differentiator. We feel more that this is a benefit that we really want to offer, because I think for a lot of people that are looking at jobs, and we're not large enough to offer stock options and ways to be vested in the company in that way, but we feel that this is something that we can offer that provides a long-term benefit to our employees.
We have a very specific question from Molokai, and I'll send it your way. What is better, an IRA or life insurance? Those are two very different products.
They're both wonderful. But what I would say to that is that there are different kinds of IRAs. First of all, there's an IRA with traditional IRA where you put money in and you actually get a tax offset. That's the one that most people use, and it's what business owners typically use when they set up a SEP. They're able to put aside some of their profit and reduce their tax bill. The IRA that the state Hawaii Saves program is using, I believe, is a Roth IRA. Now, a Roth IRA deducts money from your paycheck after taxes, and then you save it. It builds up tax-free over time, and when you retire, you're not actually taxed on that income. So you get the benefit at the back end. But in the short term, it's a little harder because you're taking out after-tax dollars. You're not getting a tax benefit. Now, life insurance is a completely different thing. It protects against premature death as opposed to a retirement plan, which is really protecting you from outliving your assets, from living too long. So it's two different parts of the same coin. They're both great, and you should have both.
I suspect that some people watching tonight, hearing us talk about this, will suddenly say, okay, I need to have a conversation with someone about this. Where should they go? Should they go to AARP? Should they, Google a financial advisor? I'd love to hear both of your takes on where to start.
I'll say they should go to aarp.org because they have a
Your check's in the mail.
That's a nice gesture.
I'll tell you why. They have a terrific retirement plan calculator for individuals. They have a whole series of tools and educational material. And they're not the only ones. There's a lot of material out to help people calculate what they would need and to answer that question, how much do I need to put aside today and every month for the rest of my career to get to where I want to go? So those tools are available, and they're tremendously good tools. So that's my answer in the short term is I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. My answer is this. I feel that fear that people have, that need to get started, but they don't know where. And there are a ton of great tools out there, and there are also a lot of great products out there. As John mentioned, there's no dearth of retirement products. We have new products coming onto the market as time goes on. What we know, though, is that if you don't have a way to save for retirement out of your regular paycheck, only 5% of people will go out on their own and open an IRA. To your point, I think that's exactly what they're feeling. They don't know where to get started. And so there's a lot of great products and there's a lot of great information out there, and we hope people use it.
And maybe an advisor, too, because, again, that's what got Stan on the path to making this happen.
How do you know the person that that you find is responsible? If you're out there and you're just Googling, how do you know that you're finding someone who's good?
Well, the way I look at it, we have an organization here in Hawaii and in most other states called the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors. And this is a group of highly skilled, licensed, and experienced professionals. They're available on the internet. They're available through the local chapter. We know there's several hundred right here in this city that are available to really answer any of these questions. And I would want to trust one of them to come out for my individual needs, because they can also do insurance and securities and IRAs and workplace plans. To me, that's where to start. Start with somebody really smart who has the experience to know how this works.
Even if the state does adopt this, it's going to be several years before this is implemented. What do you think in the meantime? What should we be doing?
Well, I think everyone should start looking at options. If you're an employee or you haven't started saving, like everyone's talked about, yesterday was really the best time to do it, but today's not too late. So I think looking up being kind of from the tech background, I would say that there's a lot of simple to set up online technology-driven platforms where you just basically need a bank account to set it up to link to, and you can start contributing $10, $20, and it automatically, invests for you, and it puts it in and it rebalances it. I think from a low touch, not low risk, but in terms of effort, I think even setting up something like that, which I did pretty much right out of college as well. At that time I had very little, financial literacy, but it's just going out there and trying to understand what are some of your options. And I would hope that a show like this and talking about the topic, if it does nothing else, it helps people start thinking about what are some steps that they can take, right? Talk to someone, talk to an advisor, just get started. That's the point.
John, I know you said this wasn't really on your radar before tonight, and understandably, like you said, you start your day at 1 in the morning. How do we get that conversation started in a workplace like yours?
I think this is a great platform for me personally now. After being a part of this show, that I'm gonna come back, tomorrow and have a little conversation with my guys and see where they stand. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just pretty much starting tomorrow. It's just getting enough information readily available to me. I think that would be from the point where I would start. Yeah, like you said, it's just going out there and talking to people and seeing what's out there.
Well, if there's one thing in Hawaii that we do well, it is talk stories. So hopefully we do spark a discussion. Someone writing in tonight, can plan advisors receive commissions, and do they have a fiduciary responsibility? So how does this work in terms of how much money the advisors would get from a state plan?
Sure. So the state program, again, just to kind of reiterate, there is a fee cap in the way that most of these states work. So for instance, it's 0.75% roughly in Oregon. I sit on the Maryland Retirement Security Board. Ours is 50 basis points, so 0.5%. And then those are split up, as John mentioned earlier, between record keepers and investment advisors. So a record keeper is the person who keeps the accounts and often picks up the phone calls. And then the investment advisors are the folks who are managing the money. And we've got at least I think 4 or 5 different providers that have bid for this work across the country, because it is a private sector solution, a public-private partnership. So the fees would be paid out of assets that are collected from employee checks. So if you put away $100 a month, you're giving less than maybe $1 in fees. That's as high as it would go. And there's no fee from the program for employers. The employer is responsible for the payroll deduction. So as you heard, that might take a little bit of time, but not too much. But that's it.
Okay, and what's next for this? I know that the crossover in the legislature happens in about a week. Where do you see this going in terms of the legislation itself?
We are thrilled by the reception we've received in the legislature. This week, ARP has met with the Senate President and with the Speaker of the House. We've attended the Ways and Means hearing in the Senate where it passed the bill out. We're ready for a floor vote soon, and it'll cross over to the House after that. So keep an eye out for the next few weeks. I think there'll be a lot of intense action.
Okay. If you want to get involved on the other side, what would you say to that?
I guess our approach would be just to make sure, and I know policymakers will do this, to ask the key questions. Is the plan necessary given the fact that you have all these options in the private sector? Is it something that we prioritize as a state to spend this money that's precious to us on this as opposed to something else? Is it going to be safe for the employer to engage in this? Are they going to be legally above board? Is the plan going to be stable? Is it going to be changing? Are the rules going to change over time? Will it be sustainable? That is, we will have to continue to subsidize the program. Will we get the kind of projections that we need in order to make it self-sustaining? Those are the questions that every policymaker really needs to ask. And you have some great people here in Hawaii who understand the finances of government, and those are the key questions they're going to be looking at.
I do want to ask, I know we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, Sarah, about some of the issues that Stanley raised in terms of the burden on the employer, because small businesses here already feel like they have a lot of red tape to get through. How much extra work would this add to them?
Absolutely. Our philosophy with these programs is if it doesn't work for small business, it doesn't work. So in most of the states I've been working with, we've got small business owners that are engaged not only in passing the legislation, but also in standing it up. So actually, these are not employer-sponsored plans. That's a kind of a key industry term. The plan is going to be facilitated by the state, and the only thing the employer is allowed to do is run the payroll deduction and give a packet of information to the employees. So we feel very confident that employers will not find this to be a burden. And in fact, when I've talked in other states, I heard from actually a line cook in Illinois who said to me, I thought 401ks were for doctors and lawyers. I didn't think they were for people in the restaurant industry. And his boss said, where has this been my whole life? This is something I've needed to remain competitive, and frankly, it's the right thing to do for my workers.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for being here tonight. Mahalo to all of you for joining us. We thank our guests, Sarah Gill, Senior Legislative Representative in the Government Affairs Department of AARP, Stanley Lau, founder and owner of Hawaii Tech Support, John Iha, the owner and chef of Gochi Grill, and John Mangan, Regional Vice President of State Relations of the American Council of Life Insurers. Next week on Insight, raising the state's minimum wage. Should we? Why or why not? Make sure to join us. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. A hui hou.